So I actually recorded this video once already, and at the beginning I said I'm going to try not to ramble, then proceeded to ramble for 45 minutes. And the HDMI output no longer works on my camera, so I can't really see the shot very well. I tried to set it up beforehand, record tests, and then just sit in the same position, but ultimately I was still off-center. It was just terrible. And so I'm sitting there looking at this nearly hour-long video thinking, am I going to edit all this down? I mean, half the time I'm leaning forward and I'm out of focus anyway, so just do it again and do it better. So, this is a 6105 budget build. It uses an AliExpress dial, an NH35, an AliExpress case, some cheap silicone straps, and some hands from a steel dive. And you can buy those on AliExpress, so you can actually just get all the parts for this build on AliExpress. One thing to note, the dial only has 3 o'clock and 3.8 o'clock crown position feet on the back, so if you want to put it in a case like this one, which mimics the 6105 case very closely with a 4.1 crown position, you're going to have to remove the dial feet and use dial dots, which is what I did. And this is the first time, or the first project, where I didn't use the diamond file to remove the remnants of the dial feet. Once I snapped them off, I used a rotary tool that I got for Christmas, and it made the job really easy and came out really clean, so really happy about that. But yes, take note, if you're going to use this dial with this case, you're going to need to use dial dots. Next, the hands. If you buy hands on AliExpress and they have white, lume and glow green, then you won't need to do anything. But for this particular build, the hands that I had were very green in normal light as per the steel dive. So I removed the lume on there, re-lumed the hands with this Anchor lume kit that I bought on eBay for £10. It's just a cheap kit. And naturally after that's all dried and set, just put the dial on with dial dots, put the hands on in the case, cut the stem to size, and then attach the crown with Loctite. Then throw a nice little display case back on there, although it comes with a case back anyway, so you can just use the original if you're not bothered about that. And then stick on the bezel insert, aligning it with the dial, obviously, and then finishing it all off by throwing one of the silicone straps on there. And here's what ultimately I ended up with. It's a beautiful 6105 build, and it's a simple one. When you look at it, especially because the text on this dial is just flat printed on the dial, it really gives you vibes of the SLA 033J, that 2019 limited edition reissue of the 6105. And I love the bezel insert that came with this case. Not only is the lume pip on this triangle perfectly centered, but the font looks awesome. It's not like some of the other ones where they use a different font and it doesn't match the 6105 look. It's a real shame, because I'd love to have a ceramic bezel insert that looks identical to this, just for that scratch resistance, because the font really makes this look awesome. It really does. But I digress. There's the basics of the build, but obviously I made mistakes, things went wrong. Let me take you through a summarized timeline of the build rather than doing a full build log. So I started by re-luming the hands, and the first mistake I made was applying too much pressure with the pegwood when scratching the original lume off the minute hand. And just like that, you've bent the hand and made it completely useless. What I learned from this really over the whole process is, if you can help it, if there's nothing on the hands that needs to be preserved, like say a black line or a red dot, just put them in acetone. It will melt the lume away, and then you're not moving the hands around as much, potentially scuffing them, because even laying them down on a silicone mat can scuff them if your mat's not clean enough, and you'll avoid risking putting too much pressure on there if you just soak them in acetone instead and they come out nice and clean. So really, with this particular build anyway, the only one you have to take care on is the second hand to keep that red dot on there. Although you probably could mix up the lume mixture with the binder and the powder and maybe a bit of red acrylic paint or something, and then redo that bit as well. But I digress. When I got to the point at the end of the project where re-luming the hands again, I just used acetone to minimize more scuffing. Now, here's an overview of how to re-lume hands. Bear in mind, I'm not an expert at this, so there's probably mistakes in my method. And when it comes to the thickness of the mixture, honestly, trial and error will be the best way to figure that out. So start by removing the old lume from the hands and cleaning them up as best you can. Again, if there's nothing to preserve, you can just put the hands in acetone, provided that they're metal. If you've got any other kinds of hands, obviously you want to make sure the acetone doesn't destroy them, but with these kinds of hands for NH movements, you're probably fine. Then with your container, put down your binding liquid first and then just add lume powder to it until you're satisfied with the thickness of the mixture. If it's too thick, you'll get more of a matte finish and it might clump up a bit, and if it's too thin, it might be a little too watery and it won't stick. You want it somewhere in between, but again, trial and error will help you figure this out. Next, place your hands on something with the bottom side facing upwards and make sure the section where the lume's going to go is floating and there's nothing touching it. Some people use toothpicks for this, but I didn't have any, so I just embed them in Rodico. Then it means that I can hold them firmly, but be warned, if you haven't got fresh Rodico, you might dirty the hands doing this and then you have to clean them later, which is what happened to me. So maybe don't do it like that, but if it's all you've got, it does work. Next, take the little stick that you used to mix the lume, and in my case it was a plastic one with a slightly sloped pointy edge that came with a different lume kit, but the wooden one that came with this anchor kit will do the same thing. And then just scoop a little bit of lume up from the mixture and then bridge it across the gap on the hand so that it extends over the edge. That way you know that it's covering both sides of the gap. And then slowly drag it across to the top of the hand so that the lume clings to the sides and spreads evenly across. If you make the mistake of putting too much lume on the tool when applying it, you might find that it bulges over onto the front side and you will need to clean it off and try again. Same thing with if the lume mixture is too thick. You might find that it just doesn't cling and spread fully across the hand and you keep having to add more lume and go backwards and try and drag it across and it's just not spreading. You're going to have to make the mixture a bit thinner and try again. And again, just take the hand off, use some IPA on a Q-tip to wipe it off, make sure it's clean, and then just try again. And if you're having trouble and it makes you feel any better, I went through 2 sets of hands on this build and relumed both of them several times just to get it right. Anyway, once you're happy with how it's spread across, nothing has spilled over to the front side and there's no air bubbles or debris or anything that's going to make them look terrible, just put them somewhere where dust will not fall on them, like a plastic box or container, and let that lume dry and cure. It can be done after about 4 or 5 hours, but honestly, I found that they can even change a little bit after more than that, so give them at least 12 hours to dry, and in my case, I left them for a full 24 hours before I used them. And that's it. Hopefully, after they're done and they're dry, there's no dark spots or air bubbles or anything else that will ruin the finish, and if you're happy with them, you can go ahead and put them on the watch. So yeah, after several attempts of reluming the hands, I had a set of hands that matched the dial pretty nicely. Now, to cut a long story short, I wasn't happy with the lume job on the hour hand, so I made the decision to remove the hands, and I used the manual hand pullers to do it. I placed a bag over the hands and pulled the hands off, and I scratched the dial. And look at that, it doesn't even look like much, it looks like a fibre, but I couldn't have another eyesore on the dial that my eyes would be drawn to remind me of my stupidity. So I ordered another dial. They're only 15 quid, so it seemed like a no-brainer, to be honest. And it taught me that, honestly, if you're gonna remove hands, always protect the dial. It doesn't matter if you're gonna use a bag to protect the hands and the dial, you might scratch the dial through the bag, so use a dial protector as well. And I decided to relume the backup hour hand and second hand, because we've already dipped into the backup for the minute hand anyway, since I bent that first one. Because the watch had already been put together, and I didn't want to dismantle it. I thought, let's just relume the backups, and then when I go to put the new dial on, I'll switch to the backups. And I had another reason to use the backups, and that was the second hand is actually slightly different. The tip of it is a slightly different shape to the first set, which I prefer, it's larger, but also when I put the hands back on the second time, the second hand went on a bit easier than I would have liked, and I wasn't keen on keeping that in there. I did give it the shake test, it didn't come off. I wore the watch for over a week, it didn't come off, but I wasn't happy having it in there long term, so using the backup made sense to me. Then to finish the build, I got the new dial in, removed the dial feet, and used my rotary tool, removed the remnants of the dial feet again, and then put new dial dots on, put the new dial on, tried to align it even better around the date window than the first time I did it. I was really trying to be a perfectionist with this one. And then I put the hands back on, not too close to the dial this time either. Wow. It's perfect. I literally ticked over at exactly 12 o'clock. I genuinely can't remember if that's ever happened to me. You'd think I would remember if it's happened because I make videos about these things, but that makes me happy.
And of course, how could I forget the stem? It took me 3 tries to get the stem to the correct length. The first one I cut, although it seemed absolutely perfect and screwed flush down to the case, whenever I tried to press the crown in to activate the time after setting it, it just would not click in. Why? So I cut the second stem longer, still had the same problem. And again, it just won't click in. How much longer do I have to cut these things? It seems to be the perfect length. Fortunately, got it on the 3rd try. It's a little bit awkward, but it does still consistently click in and activate the time, so I'll take it. I've got the measurement on screen here, so if you do a build in this case, you know roughly how long you should cut the stem, but you know, maybe have some spare stems just in case. But anyway, now that I've talked about the issues that I've had with this build, let's get into the final thoughts, and I just want to touch on these silicone straps that I got.
One of them was just under $5 and one of them was just over $5, so that was pretty good.
Although the prices do tend to change, so double check the price since they've already changed since I bought mine.
I ultimately went with this one here that has the sort of coin edge ridges down the middle, and I took the buckle off of the other one because it was just better. It didn't have a sort of weird curved shape on the end of it, and it was brushed and a bit chunkier. I just found that this one with the ridges was more comfortable. I don't even feel it on my wrist, whereas this other one here with the 3 link sort of look, it's really nice and it's more robust than the other one, but it's even got the easy spring bar things, which I wish this other one had, but it does look nicer on your wrist when it's wrapped around my wrist and you don't see the little easy spring bar sticking out underneath. So I guess that is a plus for it being less convenient, but I just found the 3 link looking one here a bit too uncomfortable on the wrist compared to this other one, and I do like the sort of coin edge look. It goes with it quite well. You can get a rubber strap from AliExpress that is a chocolate bar style strap that is 19mm in width and is supposed to be a sort of 6105 match. I couldn't find a 19mm waffle strap that wasn't overpriced. The Uncle Seiko one was more expensive than what I was willing to pay for a simple rubber strap, and Strapcode's one was even more expensive, so I thought, nah, let's just go for a cheap silicone strap to get the job done. And this one's quite nice. I think it looks really good, and you can find this exact one on AliExpress with a nicer buckle on it for just a bit more money if you don't want to buy 2 and then swap it like I did. Now, I actually delayed putting out this video for a while because I was really holding out for trying to get a bracelet for this watch. I tried modifying some of my junk bracelets by grinding down some end links and doing a terrible job of not making the lines straight, and the spring bars wouldn't line up anyway. Looking online for other options, apart from the Uncle Seiko H-Link strap for a 6105, you're really looking at hollow end links from Seiko Sys, which, if I have to import them, it's going to cost me like 40 quid for 2 little hollow end links. You've got to be joking. No. And then I contacted Harold at Yaboki's. I asked him directly, do you have any Super Oyster bracelets for a 6105? He didn't have them listed in his shop, but he did have one he was willing to sell to me for $118. That was including airmail, so it would have gotten here relatively quick, but as much as it was a really nice Super Oyster bracelet, you know, milled clasp, all the bells and whistles on it, and solid end links, this is an aftermarket case, and I can't justify spending the same amount as the rest of the watch cost on the bracelet just to find that the spring bars might not line up because it's an aftermarket case, and I just don't know. This case tries to mimic the 6105 really closely, but I just couldn't risk the spring bars not lining up at that price. You know, just having this really expensive bracelet that's not going to fit, and then I'd have to resell it because that's probably more convenient than sending it back to Harold. So ultimately, I just decided to say screw it. You've got some nice silicone straps, just finish the video, and maybe if you guys have got some ideas on what kind of a bracelet I can get for this, you know, whether it's to buy a steel dive bracelet and like grind down the end links, because I wouldn't want to butcher anything more expensive than that, even though I'd like to have something a bit better. But if I can get the end links out of it, you know, even the whole steel dive bracelet's only 20 quid, so just for the end links, if it works and I can put another bracelet on it, maybe that's worth doing. I've tried grinding things before, but I never get the lines straight, so I would just screw it up. Maybe I could modify the case, maybe I could file away 0.5 millimeter on either side, and it's a shame really. You'd think 0.5 millimeter's worth of material wouldn't take that long to file away, but it does. It took me like 10 minutes to do it on the grinder in the shed, being really careful with one of my junk bracelets, only to find I did a really terrible job of it. So I just don't know what to do. How does one make an end link for these kinds of things that looks good? I just want a nice bracelet for this watch, because I really like this watch and I want to keep wearing it. I mean, it feels like the simpler option is to just modify the case, because a 20mm more common bracelet would open up more options, and so having it be 20mm would be easier, but I could ramble about that all day. Let's finish this video with the pleasantries anyway. Again, I think this watch looks really nice. It's giving me sort of a mix of 6105 and SLA 033J vibes. And it's really pleasing to me. I think it looks really good. Loving the font and style of the aluminium bezel insert. I really like the flat print on the dial. It makes it look really smart.
And it's not like my Steel Dive mod, which constantly reminds me of my incompetence, where I put an OEM logo on the dial which was stored improperly, and it reflects the light unevenly, which
still bothers me to this day. It's nice to have a version that doesn't do that to me. And again, it's just such a smart looking build, and the Anchor Lume kit that I used for these hands matches this dial perfectly. So we have beautiful uniformity. Here's a Lume shot here. The initial illumination is nice, and although the Lume does lose brightness quite quickly, even 4 or 5 hours later of it not being exposed to the light in the middle of the night, I can still pick it up and look at it, and I can read it just fine. So it might not be the brightest of Lume, but it works quite nicely, and for 10 quid for a cheap Lume kit that could Lume dozens of things, that's wonderful. You don't have to buy the most expensive Lume kit to get something half decent out of it, so I was pleased with that. And I really like this case. I love the way this bezel looks, with the attention to detail of duplicating the original 6105 with the little notches on the bottom from what would have been on the original, a little ball bearing that creates those clicks. This is really nice. And I love the sort of coin edge style that this bezel has with the slight slope, because it's not the same as the coin edge on the Steel Dive case or a typical coin edge bezel. The actual lines on the side of the bezel are slightly curved instead of straight, and the whole bezel has a slight slope to it and a soft edge at the top. It's really comfortable between the finger and the thumb when you go to rotate it. And speaking of rotation, here's what it sounds like. So it's your typical retention wire and click wire, but what's nice about this one, unlike the Heimdaller that I had before I took the bezel off and put a pilot's bezel on it, and my 2 Steel Dives, is this one doesn't have a stiff spot. It rotates smoothly, consistently round the entire rotation of the bezel, and this is the nicest click wire bezel I've ever had. I don't know if I've said that about the Steel Dive one or not at the time, because it was decent when I first got it, but this one's really good. It's not too stiff, it's not too loose, and it's really smooth consistently all the way around, so that is a plus for that. And I really like the crystal on this case as well. I could have done without the blue AR coating. It's not a bad touch, but I would have preferred clear AR coating. But the slight dome on what I think is the underside, I'm not sure. It's a very subtle dome anyway on this crystal, and it is quite nice. The black chapter ring looks quite nice in this case, just like the Steel Dive ones did. I'm liking that the crown tube is visible from the back, like the original 6105. And I've got to say this, when I put this up next to my 2 Steel Dive mods, I feel like this case just looks better. It looks more curved, whereas the Steel Dive ones to me look kind of rectangular for some reason. I don't know if I'm going crazy or something, but I digress. All in all, I think this build turned out really nicely, and although I had issues with the hands and re-luming them over and over, I ended up with a nice set of hands on here. I preferred this second hand on here to the first one that was slightly smaller, and I can't stop wearing this build. I cannot stop wearing it. And for a budget builds always please me, because when you look at it you're like, wow, it's so much watch for so little money. Apart from the fact that you probably wouldn't take this diving. Like, I can't vouch for the water resistance on these aftermarket cases, especially one for just 40 quid, and because I swapped a display case back onto it. If you were to try and take this swimming or anything else, maybe use the original case back just to be certain, and I probably wouldn't take this swimming. Anyway, there's my less rambled version. It only took me 20 minutes to ramble through this time instead of an hour, which is, Anyway, let me know what you think of the build. Let me know if you're going to build something like this, and I will put the links to parts in the description.
And if you don't want to mess with dial dots for this style,
you could go for the Namoki Mods case and put in a black chapter ring, double dome sapphire, and a coin edge bezel, and then you would be able to just put a 20mm bracelet on there, and they have nice end links that look really good. But this case mimics the original 6105 perfectly, so especially with the crown position and the bezel, especially that's why I went for this, because of that beautiful bezel. If you want a more premium option, just go for the Namoki Mods. I'll put affiliate links in the description, so if you do buy from those, you'll get a little discount and it'll help me out at the same time. So anyway, rambling over, I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you like this build as much as I do, because for a budget, complete, full build of a 6105 watch, this looks really nice, and I've been enjoying this one for over a month now, so... Oh, and let me know if you've got any ideas for how I could get a bracelet on this that looks like it was made for it. Anyway, thank you for watching, God bless you, and I'll see you next time.